Welcome back to Things You Don't Know, where we shine a light on the stories that history books like to seem to gloss over. I'm Chandler Foster.
And I'm Dr. Weaver.
And I'm Dr. Sean Deneen. Today we're diving into a pandemic that killed more people than World War I and yet remains criminally underdiscussed. The 1918 influenza pandemic, better known by its misleading name, the Spanish flu.
And right up front, let's be clear, this was not Spanish. The evidence strongly suggests that it began in Kansas, in the United States. We'll come back to that in a minute here, but if you're picturing flamenco and bullfights, you're way off.
Yeah, this pandemic killed an estimated 50 to 100 million people, 50 to 100 million people
Good
globally.
Lord.
That's more than the battlefield deaths of World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War combined. And yet, it barely gets a chapter in most high school history classes.
That's terrible. So why call it the Spanish flu? Spain was neutral in World War I and had a free press. When the virus hit, they reported it, unlike the United States, Britain, or France, where governments censored news to preserve wartime morale.
That censorship backfired. Spain got blamed for a pandemic that it didn't even start. Meanwhile, real origins trace back to Haskell County, Kansas, where a local doctor, Lori Minor, reported an unusually aggressive strain of the flu in early 1918.
Yeah, shortly after troops from that area were sent to Camp Funston, part of Fort Riley, thousands of young soldiers crowded together, living in tight quarters, coughing, sneezing, sharing mess halls, sharing latrines, sleeping nose to nose. You couldn't have designed a better virus incubator than that.
And from there, it spread like wildfire. Camp Funston became ground zero for the first wave of infection that traveled with the American Expeditionary Force to Europe. Then it mutated into something far deadlier.
Let's turn our attention now to the war that actually fueled this pandemic. The timing could not have been any worse. You have global troop movement, cramped transport ships, exhausted immune systems, and trench warfare. This all creating conditions, very ideal conditions for transmission.
It is important to understand this. The second wave, starting in fall of 1918, was far deadlier than the first. The virus had evolved. Soldiers carried it from camp to port to battlefield, and then they brought it home.
Entire military installations were infected in days. Medical tents were just overwhelmed. In Philadelphia, despite warnings from doctors, the city held a massive parade to promote the sale of war bonds. Within 72 hours, hospitals were overflowing. Over 12,000 people died in just 6 weeks.
And that parade is now taught in public health courses as a case study in exactly what not to do.
Here's another thing. We didn't even know what we were dealing with. In 1918, scientists hadn't identified viruses yet. Electron microscopes did not exist. Doctors assumed it was bacterial and therefore prescribed treatments that didn't do a ding dong thing.
Some used quinine, others tried bloodletting like we're back in the Middle Ages. Many patients were given aspirin in dangerously high doses, which may have worsened symptoms or even caused internal bleeding. The brother of a dear friend of mine died because he was given a liquid medication that had lye in it. It was guesswork and mostly wrong.
And what's even more disturbing and even spooky, if you ask me, this virus hit young and healthy adults the hardest. Unlike most flu strains, which killed a very old and the very young, this one attacked people in their prime, people ages 20 to 40 years old.
And we think we know why. The virus triggered what we now call a cytokine storm. What that is, it's when the immune system goes into overdrive and starts attacking the body's own cells, particularly in the lungs.
It caused a particularly gruesome end. Victims often drowned in their own fluids, lungs filled with blood and pus. Some died within hours of the first symptoms.
Wow, that fast, huh, Dr. Deneen?
Indeed,
Yeah, that's pretty fast, I have to say. The descriptions from the time are very chilling. People turned blue or purple, especially around the lips and fingertips. Some reports say that bodies were so discolored that it was hard to tell if someone was dead or just unconscious.
now let's talk about the real crisis, the cover up. The U.S. government had passed the Sedition Act during World War I. That made it illegal to say anything that could undermine the war effort. See Jonah Goldberg's Liberal Fascism for more details about that. So it was illegal to say anything seen as having a bad effect on morale, including reports of illness or death from the flu.
You weren't even allowed to wear masks because it would spook people, right?
Yes, we know something about wearing masks more recently.
Yeah, and some cities were even told to stay quiet. Newspapers ran cheerful headlines while thousands were dying. People were told to just carry on, go to work, go to church, and even attend rallies.
It wasn't about public safety, it was about control. As I said, even mask mandates and bans on public gatherings were less about stopping the virus and more about projecting calm. The government didn't want panic. It also didn't want to have problems with gathering troops together because guess what? The war needed it. But the silence came at a massive cost.
In some cities, bodies piled up. Coffins literally ran out. Refrigerated train cars were repurposed to hold the dead. How ghoulish is that? Funeral homes were overwhelmed. People had to bury their loved ones in mass graves or leave them on their porches for days.
How would you like that? Your husband, your wife, your child dies, and there's no coffin, so you have to prop them up on the porch.
Awful.
Or put them in some kind of big, massive mass grave somewhere. Yeah, okay. And not to mention the economic effects. It's quite devastating. Businesses shut down, entire industries stalled, food supplies ran low. In many cities, basic services collapsed because so many workers were sick or dying or just even already dead.
When you can't get food, that's a problem. And when you can't get your garbage taken to the dump, that's a problem. Yeah, it is worth noting that this hit during the final months of World War I and the immediate aftermath. The world was already stretched to the limit. Resources were scarce, and the loss of so many young working age adults had long term effects on economic recovery.
In a time when women who were married did not work at all, families lost their sole breadwinners, children were orphaned. Veterans return home to grieving cities only to face another invisible enemy without proper health care or any kind of support.
Yeah, and unlike COVID-19, there were no federal relief packages, no unemployment aid. You know, if you were sick, you just simply stayed home and hoped that your neighbors could bring food.
Yeah. Yeah. It was different than COVID-19. Of course, that was the beginnings of that were also tried to be covered up. Like it's not that big of a deal. Like if we don't count them, then it doesn't count. Right? Isn't that what was said?
Mhm.
That's exactly what was said.
Yep. So here's the tragedy in all of this. After 1920, the pandemic basically disappeared from public discourse. There were no national memorials, no major policy shifts. People just wanted to move on, and we're going to get to some other issues here shortly.
And governments, for obvious reasons, were happy to let that happen. Acknowledging the scale of failure would have meant taking responsibility for silencing warnings and spreading misinformation. So the flu got buried in the public memory.
Yeah, so much so that it became the Spanish flu, a name that just got coined to blame someone else and erase the American origins and even American responsibility, the government censorship, the scientific ignorance, and the cost of human life.
But as we said, the truth is we should have called it the American pandemic. The evidence points to Kansas, as we have already mentioned. The virus spread through our military network. The government covered it up. The consequences were global. Woodrow Wilson knew about this. He knew, and he decided not to let it be known to the public. That is one of the reasons the Sedition Act was passed. You remember that, Dr. Deneen, don't you?
I do.
Well, I don't, you won't remember it, but you know that that's what happened.
Indeed. And some have said that the guilt he felt over that may have been the cause of the stroke that debilitated him and had his wife basically running the government for the last year and a half of his presidency.
Do you think it was a stroke, or others have suggested that he caught the bug and because he was sick when he went to Europe after that, and he never seemed to fully recover. Could it have been a stroke after he caught the bug, you think, maybe?
Maybe so, because it said that he has had long-term effects from the bug, and that's how he potentially passed
I
away.
mean, I don't have it stand up in court proof, but my spidey sense and my historian sense says it's certainly possible. So as we look back over a century later, the Spanish flu, or rather the American pandemic, teaches us a lot more than just medical history. It's a lesson in transparency, humility, and preparedness.
It's a reminder that censorship kills, that science evolves, and that naming matters because names shape the way we remember.
That is correct. Boots on the ground history, past, present, and future connected, and those who give the dialogue for the past shape what we do in the present, and that shapes what happens to us in the future. It's a tragedy that we need to be aware of. Censorship, as you mentioned, Chandler, is so critical because guess what? Opposing views are very important. Even if you disagree with somebody, you need to listen and glean what you can from what they're saying. What side of the political aisle you sit on is really not important in knowing the truth. It does not, that's not the important thing. It's knowing the knowledge, having a history that is complete, all the pieces put together, right, Dr. Deneen?
Absolutely. With
Absolutely.
as little bias as possible. There's always going to be some, let's be realistic about that. But
Sure.
to try to look at things from a multivariate point of view is very important.
Okay.
Yes, and thank you so much for listening to this episode. And we'll be back next time, so stay tuned. So until then, stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, we do want to thank you for joining us today. And if this episode changed the way you think about the past, we hope you'll share it because forgotten history is doomed to repeat itself.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is.
So long, folks.
Bye bye.